Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laureen Clausen with IT Training. So glad that you're here with us as we cover Excel basic formulas. I do have a handout for today's session, and it has several fill-in-the-blanks that you can utilize if you want. So we're going to go over a few PowerPoint slides, and then we'll dive into Excel. And I will be giving you some information along the way. So if you're listening to this via recording, I recommend that you print out the handout in advance, so you may want to pause this, and then you can follow along with the handout. All right, let's go ahead and get started by covering our objectives for this session. The first thing we want to do as we think about Excel and learning how to pull formulas together, we want to explore the basic language of Excel. So you'll see on this particular slide I have some common things you might see in Excel, and you may not know how to interpret some of these terms. So I want to talk about that. The next thing I want to do is I want to be able for us to create formula content. So basic formulas, again, these will not be complex formulas that we will be covering. We'll also talk a little bit about the 5 basic functions that you can use in Excel. And then finally, we'll learn how to copy formulas. Some of you who have already dabbled in formulas, this may not be anything new for you. And then we want to make sure that you know how to reference formulas in other worksheets and workbooks. And I often get the phone call from someone telling me they have a formula in another workbook, and how do they get it in their workbook? So I wanted to answer that question today. In addition, we have some errors that we sometimes get, and I have one here circled on our objective slide. And I just want to make sure that you have some troubleshooting tips on how to resolve errors. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that towards the end of the session. For some of you, you may find that formulas can be really complex. Others of you may just have started dabbling, but there's nothing worse than having a formula that's a little bit frustrating. So I don't know how many Big Bang Theory followers we have out there, but we wanted to point out that even for our Dr. Sheldon Cooper, sometimes has problems with formulas himself. So my goal today would be for us to look at the toad of truth. What's the toad of truth in Excel? And I thought this was a good slide to point out. So that's our icebreaker for today. Let's go ahead and get started. If you're following along with your handout, this is where we'll begin with our fill in the blanks. There are 3 basic rules when we compile Excel formulas. Rule number 1, a formula always begins with an equal sign. So you'll see here that I have 2 examples. We have column A and column B. Column A uses constants. So you'll see row 1, 2, and 3 there, and we have the same numbers in those fields. The formula in cell A4 is equals 1 plus 3 plus 6. Notice the formula in cell B4. It's equals B1 plus B2 plus B3. The example in column B is what we call a relative reference, where we are utilizing specific cell references to create our formula. And in that particular example, you really want to, that is the correct way to string a formula together, and you want to follow the relative reference format. So we're always going to be referencing specific cells. We'll look at some examples in a little bit, but we'll be referencing specific cells and not utilizing constants. The reason we want to do that, let's say for example in row 1, I want to change that number from a 1 to a 10. Well, if I wanted to change that in row 1, in column A, cell A4, I would have to also change that formula to be 10 plus 3 plus 6. Now if I simply changed cell B1 from 1 to the number 10, I wouldn't have to do anything in that formula because it will resume the change that I've made. So it will incorporate that. So again, you always want to use a relative reference, and remember that a formula begins with an equal sign. A couple of other things that I just want to go over with you when we talk about the basic language of Excel. These should be pretty familiar to you. We're not going to go over all of them, but I do have them in your handout. But if you're new to Excel, we utilize the asterisk sign for multiplication and the / for division. We won't need to worry about any of the other signs, and we won't be covering exponents in this class. You should be familiar with our comparison operators, the greater than and equal signs. So those should just be a refresher, and again, you have them in the handout. There are a couple of other things that you want to be familiar with. The first one would be our reference operator. And the reference operator, essentially, there are two examples. We have our colon and we have our comma. In our first example, the colon, all that means is the word through. So here we see B5 colon B15. What that's saying is the cell ranges that I'm going to select, B5 through B15. And then I'm telling Excel, for these ranges, I want you to perform a specific function. In the example of a comma, the way I would read this formula, it's a sum. So I'm saying sum up B5 through B15, and also sum up D5 through D15. I'm going to go ahead now, and really quickly what I want to do is I want to jump over to Excel. And let me just stop the slideshow for a second. And we're just going to go over rule number 1 really quickly. So I have a very easy spreadsheet that I put together, not much to it. And there's a couple of ways that I can do rule number 1. I'm going to do my basic formula of addition where we're adding our sales and overhead. I'm going to type in my equals. I can select the cell and then do plus and then hit enter. Notice that both of the appropriate cells are color-coded, and I'm going to hit enter there. Also, I'm noticing that I'm not showing our formula bar here. Okay. The other thing I can do is I can actually type it in directly. So here's my equals. Notice the formula bar at the top equals C2 plus C3, and I'll hit my enter. Now once I have a formula that's correct, notice in the bottom right of that particular cell there's a little button there. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. I can copy the formula and it will copy all the way across. We're going to do the same thing going down. In this particular case, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start my sign with equals and select my formula. Now I could continue going through June, but notice that this can be very cumbersome. What if I had 12 months here? Well, that would take a long time to add all that up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a basic function. Instead of creating a formula, I'm going to use a function. Well, first of all, what's a function? You might be asking. I'm going to go to the Home tab. Let's get our ribbon bar here settled. A function is a shortcut of a formula, and there are 5 basic functions. And we have sum, average, our count, and then minimum and maximum. In this case, I just want to do a sum, just like we did previously, but I don't want to go ahead and do equals and then every single month. So the function, I'm going to click sum. Notice that it automatically chooses the range, and it's recognizing that there are cells there. What if I didn't want to have the entire range through June selected? I just want to verify, and let's say I didn't want all of the cells. I just wanted to add the first 3 months. I could press shift and then click and then hit enter. So I will see those dotted lines there when I'm working in my formula, and I just want to shift and click to select. I can always delete up here if necessary if I wanted to make some edits, and we'll do that one more time. I'm going to go ahead and hit my equals, do my auto sum, And this time I have exactly what I want. I'll hit enter. And I can copy formulas as well. And again, here are our operators, and we see the colon, so I'm selecting in this case B2 through G2. I jump back to PowerPoint really quickly, and let's just jump to the slide we need. We've gone through our colons and our commas, and we're very familiar now with Rule 1. Is there anything else that I need to know? Yes, there are other references that you should know about, and one of the examples would be sometimes we see a dollar sign. And what I'm going to do right now is show you a poll. And my GoToTraining is acting up. Bear with me 1 second. And I have a poll here, and this is an example of our dollar signs. The example, $A, $1 indicates. And then I just want to see how many people know what the example here would indicate. So I'll give you a second to read through those. And I do have a help if you don't know what that is. And it looks like our results have come in, and we're about 50-50 between help, I have no idea, and then also stay fixed on column A, row 1. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. And let's jump back to Excel. And if you selected stay fixed on, that was the correct answer. So what I want to show you is an example of that, and I want to just point out to you when you might see this reference operator. Let's look at our worksheet. In our worksheet, we have essentially some basic office furniture. I put a small spreadsheet together. So we've got our desks, chairs, and tables. And let's say that we over-ordered last year. So this year I want to decrease my orders by 50%. In this particular example, I'm just going to create a basic formula. I'm going to take my equals, the inventory from last year, and I want to multiply it by 50%. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And we already know that I can copy my formula. So what happens here if I go ahead and select? Well, I go to copy my formula, and you can tell quickly that I've got an error. But we don't see any error signs. So this is one thing I want to point out to you, because you have to be on the lookout for errors. I'm going to show you a handy tool in Excel. It's on the Formula tab, and there's a little button called Show Formulas. Now notice here, our first formula is correct. As I see my formula, it's equals B2, it's highlighted in blue, multiplied by D2 in red. Let's go to the one below it. It's doing equals B3 multiplied by D3. It's simply copying the exact same format that I had previously. Well, I really don't want the cell D2 to change in my formula. I always want it to be T2. So what do I do in that case? I'm going to turn off Show Formulas for a second. And let's go ahead and delete this data. All right. What you would do in this example is you would simply select somewhere in D2, and you want to hit your F4 key. When you hit F4, you're going to insert the dollar signs. What this is saying is, I want you to take cell B2 and multiply it by D2, but every single time that this formula is copied, I want you to stay fixed on D2. I'm going to go ahead here and copied my formula down. And now we have a good example of what is called an absolute reference. And those dollar signs, again, that means stay fixed on. So that's an important thing to know in Excel when you are seeing this symbol here, a dollar sign in front of a column and row. I'm going to jump back to Excel, or to our PowerPoint, and we're going to start talking about rule number 2. If you're following along in your handout, rule number 2, the equal sign is preceded by the items to be calculated according to the order of operation. Well, what in the world does that mean? Excel has an order of operation that we have to follow. And essentially, it's going to look for our reference operators first, so those colons and spaces, commas that we've talked about. And then, according to that order, before it starts calculating your formula, it's going to look for these items first and then begin calculating. So, let's look at a couple of examples. And the items that I have circled are the ones that we'll be looking at mostly today. Our first example, we have of the formula equals 4 plus 8 times 3 minus 6. So the way that that formula would be strung together would actually be, take the value of 8 times 3, so 24, plus 4 minus 6. In the next example, how it reads is take the value of 2 times 3, so 6, plus 5. Okay? I might really want it to be equals 5 plus 2, and then take that value times 3. So how would I get it to read the way that I want it to read? Well, that leads us to rule number 3. Rule number 3, to change the order, include parentheses around the calculations you want to perform first. That will get me what I want. So let's go ahead and look at that. So here we go. Equals, here's my parentheses, 5 plus 2 multiplied by 3. In the next example, the formula that I'm reading, essentially it's going to say we've got 2 sets of parentheses here. In the first set, I'm going to get the total of B4 plus 25, and then I want to divide that by the sum of the range D5 through F5. Okay? So those are our next few rules. Let's go ahead now. We're going to switch back to Excel and put some practical application to this. What I want to do is I actually want to switch to my worksheet, my marketing budget plan, and in this particular worksheet, we are essentially looking at a sample budget for an event, and this particular event we will say happens once a year, and I have a meeting with a manager to give him my estimates. So I'm going to start off right now essentially by putting in my subtotal. So we have our quantity, our cost per unit, and then we need to come up with our estimated subtotal. In this particular example, I'm going to go ahead and do my equals. I want cell D6, and I want to simply multiply that by cell E6. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and we can do our drag and drop here in a minute. But before I move on, I simply want to format my column. I'm going to go ahead and use the accounting number format, and then I want to go ahead and use my subtotal as well. All right, now I'm ready to do my drag and drop. And I'm ready to come up with my grand total. We already applied our auto sum function, so let's go ahead and utilize that again, and I'll hit enter. So $50,000 is what I have here for my total. Let's say I bring this to my manager, we're ready to go, and he says, hey, I hate to tell you this, but we're going to have some budget cuts, and I need you to reduce the cost by 5%. Okay, well here we go. This is real world stuff. We're always asked to do this from time to time. So let's go ahead and create a formula for our new estimate. So I've got to less this by 5%. I'll do my equals. In this particular case, I've got my total multiplied by my 5%, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, so now I've got my new total here, or actually the amount that's that I'm subtracting by. I still need to get my new total, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll do our equals, F49 minus F50. By the way, if you're listening via webinar, I will include these practice files so that you can follow along. So 47,000 is my new total. What I want to do right now is I want to probably further analyze my spreadsheet. So if I'm asked to cut down and I need to get my budget down to 47,000, I'm probably going to start looking at what are those items I can cut. What I'm going to do at this moment is simply, I just want to drag this information for now out of the way. And by the way, in Excel, I don't really need to cut and paste. I can just highlight. Once I have my cursor change into this four-headed arrow, I can simply click and drag and move that out of the way. And maybe I want to look at what the maximum amount was spent in the subtotal. Well, I can come up here into our 5 basic functions. I can go ahead and I can look at the maximum amount that's spent. We can see it's 20,000. I'm going to type in max here. And maybe I want to see the average of what the average amount that's being spent. Do the same thing. I'm going to come to my functions and click average. Got my average amount. Now notice I don't want to, as I'm building my formula, I never want to assume that what is in the dotted lines is correct. Now if we pay close attention here, we know that we don't want to put that $20,000 back in there. That's not really part of the items we need to calculate. So I'm going to, again, hold my shift and click and hit enter. And here's our average. Now I could proceed, and there is a min function. It works the same way that we did previously. A couple of things I want to point out to you though. Be careful when you're moving your formulas around. Remember previously we had our total and it was $50,000, and all I did was drag and drop. That formula still exists down here. And what it did, if you look at it closely, is it added our 20,000. We really don't need this for this particular example. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything. I mostly moved it down just to show you, be really careful when you're moving formulas around, that if you continue to add rows and items to it, it will continue to add up. Go ahead and delete this. And actually, we're going to delete this as well. A couple of other things we want to do. Let's say that I bring this new total back to my manager and he says, okay, I need you to come up with one more estimate for me. Apparently, there's rumor has it that there may be a transaction fee in accounts payable for this event. So every time we submit a voucher, they're going to charge us 10 cents. So I want you to come up with a new total. Well, in this particular case, I actually did some homework in advance. I'm going to unhide this column for you. And I have a transaction. So I estimated how many transactions. So I may only have one bill for research firm fees, but I may have 3 bills for independent research. Our transaction fee is going to be 10 cents. And my formula would be, I want to take my 10 cents. I want to multiply that by the number of transactions, and then I want to go ahead and add it to my current subtotal. So in this example, I have one transaction plus the 450, it should be 450.10. Go ahead and copy and fill And again, mostly pointing out to you that you want to pay close attention, because look at our next formula. Let's go ahead and highlight that. It's not correct because, again, we have the same issue where it's trying to pull down based on what was copied. So I should have $1,100.10. I'm going to come back to the original formula and do my F4. We've got our absolute reference now, and go ahead and hit enter. Now I can copy down if I did it correctly, and it looks like I didn't do it correctly. So this is where you want to pay close attention to your formulas. Let's show our formula bar. I never want to assume that what I have is correct on first glance. So in my second formula here, looks like it's multiplying, it's going upward. Something's not correct. What we're going to do here, I'm going to do my handy undo and undo again. Let's delete that. So I'm saying take H5, multiply by C6 plus F6. Now what I did wrong in the last example was I put the F4 in the wrong cell. All right, let's try that again. Now we should be in good shape. There we have it. Notice we have here the pound signs, a row of the pound sign. That just simply means that the value I have in here is incorrect. And if I click this triangular button, it selects the whole spreadsheet. Then if I double click anywhere in the columns, I can see the total amount. So that is an absolute reference, just mostly showing you that to promote our advanced Excel class. We do have some advanced Excel classes with Rachel Mulry. She's a Microsoft certified Excel expert, and she will be picking up from this point with absolute references as well. For now, I'm going to go ahead and delete columns G and H. We actually really don't need them in this example. And I want to show you a couple of tips with working with your spreadsheet. Now, I showed you a few ways to do some of your formulas, but one thing that I really want to point out, and I think is very important, is actually taking your current spreadsheet and converting it to a table. Now, in the past, if you've worked with spreadsheets, a lot of us have the habit of having to highlight every single thing in our table, and you actually don't need to do that. You simply select somewhere in the cell, and under Tables, under Styles, click Format as Table, and choose the format that you want. You'll notice that you get this dialog box, and it's asking you, where's the data for your table? Here we go. We see these dollar signs, and basically it's saying, I want you to stay within the ranges of A5 through F48. And I'm just going to double check to make sure that's all good. And yes, my table has headers. I'm going to go ahead and select OK. And now I can manipulate my data just a bit easier using tables. So here's a couple of things I want to point out to you. In our tables, we have this handy design tab, which is a feature of this table tools section. You have all sorts of style options that you can utilize. So if you want a darker style, you can choose that. I'm going to go ahead and just stay with what we've got for now. On the left, though, of that, you have table style options. So if you want to make your first column a little bit more bold, you can do that. Typically, you see that really with the last column, where the totals are bolded, so I'm going to do that. And maybe I want banded rows or banded columns. So your banded columns, you can have every other column be highlighted, or your banded rows would be every other row highlighted. And I'm actually going to choose a different table style. That can be helpful. Few other things that I recommend, and one would be if I was doing something like this, I may want to further analyze my data using the total row. And that total row now, here's my total, but notice if I jump over to the next cell, there's a little drop-down box. Maybe I just want the maximum amount for that column. Well, there's the maximum amount for that column. Or maybe I wanted the average for a particular column. I could utilize a different value for each column if necessary. In this particular case, I really don't need to see that, so I'm going to go ahead and clear that data. But a couple of other things I can do. I'm going to hop back into my table so I can get that design tab. And I want to insert a slicer. If I am reviewing a good chunk of information, especially for a budget, probably I want to start really looking at the different accounts and seeing how much I'm spending on a particular account. Well, with a slicer, what I can do is I can actually choose a specific field that I want to place the slicer on. So essentially I want to filter the account field. I'm going to go ahead and select that, choose OK. And now I have this dialog box, and I can simply toggle and see the totals for a specific item. So giveaways, I'm spending $375. And I could continue to toggle as needed. Now I'm not sure where my slicer went, so let's go ahead and figure that out. There we go. Again, if you want to reinsert it, account. There's our slicer. I could look at advertising, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this for now. And we have the entire field selection that we had previously. So that can be really, really helpful. Let me see if there's anything else I'm missing in that design tab. If you do have duplicates, you can remove duplicates. That can be really helpful. And if for some reason you ever want to convert back to just a free range of cells, you can convert to range, and basically it will take your table out. What I want to do now, I often get the question is, how do I reference a cell from another worksheet or maybe from a different workbook? So let's say I've gone through this, I've analyzed my data, my manager wants me to do a report, and he also wants to see what I spent last year on the fall event and on the spring event. If I simply want to reference a formula in another cell, all I've got to do in another workbook, or another worksheet, all I've got to do in my formula is select equals, and then if it's in the same workbook, I'll select the appropriate tab and the appropriate cell, and I'll go ahead and hit enter. I'm going to jump back into that cell, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on show formulas. Notice the formula for this. We've got the name of the worksheet, and it's in quotes, single quotes, fall programming prior years, and then an exclamation point referring to this specific cell. Similar to the way we would do it for a different workbook, but it looks a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and click my equals. And the quickest way to do this is jump to your View tab. If you have that spreadsheet already open, you can click Switch Windows. And then you can click the name of the document that formula exists, and then go to the appropriate tab. Select it. You'll see your little dotted lines. Hit enter. It'll take you back to your worksheet. And let's go look at that formula. And you can see it up here in our formula bar. In this case, it does the equals with the quote, and then in brackets the name of the document, and that's why you see the .xls, and then the name of the tab, and quote, the exclamation point referring to the cell, and then the specific cell. All right, so that's a quick way to insert a formula from another workbook or another worksheet. We're going to jump back to our PowerPoint and go over a couple other handy tips. And let me get to the appropriate slide. We want to know how to find and correct errors. So what is it we're looking for? Well, I've got a few tips for you. First of all, these are the common errors, and there's nothing more frustrating than getting an error and not understanding what you're being asked. So we see our example here of someone who's frustrated, and they basically want to know what's going on, what's the errors here. We've already seen the first one where a column wasn't wide enough to display the value. You may see one that says a # value with an exclamation point, and that indicates that the formula has the wrong type of argument. Well, what does that mean? Well, maybe you have a formula that you're developing where there's numbers in the formula, but you're also trying to add text in there. So all it either needs to be numbers or it needs to be an example where you're trying to pull text together. It's either basically numbers or text. You may see the error name and a question mark, and that basically means that the formula contains text that Excel doesn't recognize. So in this particular example, double check your formulas. Maybe you put, instead of a colon, you had a typo and put a comma or a question mark or something like that. But just double check your formula. Also, you'll sometimes see this #ref exclamation point. And what that means is the formula refers to a cell that doesn't exist. Well, practically speaking, sometimes we will see that when we've deleted rows. So we've deleted a row that was part of our formula, and you would get that. This # divided by 0 exclamation point. The example where we had previously, we were multiplying our 10 cents. What if we were trying to divide by 10 cents? Well, every time we did that copy previously when we dragged down our formula, there was no value being added because it was 0. If it was trying to divide by something that didn't have a value in there, a 0, you would see this error where it's dividing by 0. So that would be an example. Other troubleshooting tips. You always want to make sure you verify your formula and functions begin with an equal sign. So check your parentheses. Make sure you have them in the right place. They may be needed. Also check your cell ranges. So maybe I have A5 through D5 selected, but I really needed to have it through F5. So double check those things. Verify your copied formulas. So it could be that you're copying the formula, but maybe it's not adding everything up that you need. You might need an absolute reference. So if the part of the formula needs to stay in one specific place, stay fixed on, like we saw previously, then you need to have some $signs there. So you can either use that shortcut key of F4, or you could type something in similar to $A, $5. Be careful when you're formatting your spreadsheet. So we like our bold and underline on specific numbers, but if you're going to use them in a formula, it may not be recognized well. So what I recommend is do all your formatting after you get your spreadsheet just the way that you want it. So use unformatted numbers and formulas. If your formula is incorrect or you're getting an error, it could be that you're using the time sign instead of the asterisk to multiply by numbers. And then finally, I can't stress it enough, make sure that you consider reviewing all the formulas on your worksheet. You want to make sure you double check. So I recommend on the Formulas tab, you click that Show Formulas button, and then just spot check a few of them, especially if you're copying a lot of formulas. So that's our training for today. It's the basics of Excel. I hope you'll join us for our advanced Excel sessions with Rachel Mulry. Thank you so much for attending, and I'll stick around to answer any questions. Thank you.